The 11 Bang Bang Reload Show starts now.
Well, hello, everybody out there. I hope you can hear us. Did I unmute my mic this time? All right.
Yeah.
We're back with part 2 of All About Colts with special guest over here on my right, the King of Colt, the Sultan of the Single Six shooter, Duke Frazier Productions. Yay! And today we are doing historically accurate floppy hat night. You gonna make it over there, Duke?
Oh, I don't know, man. It's starting to get pretty deep in here. I should have brought my waders.
Oh, man, that's funny. All right. So let's just start out tonight. We're going to cover, we already have part 1 of this up on the channel, and it covers everything from 1836 to 1862. And we left off at the 1862 Pocket Police. Did we cover the 1862 Pocket Navy? Do you remember? I don't remember.
I don't remember, but I do remember we covered the Pocket Police, but Pocket Navy, I mean, same thing. It's just with the old octagon barrel and the non-fluted cylinder.
Yeah. So without further ado, what say we get into some cartridges?
Cartridges?
Cartridges. Well, you got the hat. You got to have the accent, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Speaking of hats, what is the story of your hat?
So I bought this one when I started working down at Ben's Fort, and the first year I bought it, I didn't wear it because it was stiff and kind of made me look like a Mennonite, I thought. So I didn't wear it, and then the next year I started wearing it a little more and got wet in the rain and started getting soft, and then it was getting really soft, and then I started doing the flintlock demonstrations there at Ben's, and it was flopping down, and that stock on that flintlock was just short enough that lock was sitting right under the brim of the hat, and when I go off, all that back pressure would come up because we had to have them little brass, what they call those flash guards on the side. So all the flash would go up and under my hat and in my face, kind of like what happened with a rolling block one day. And so I got mad about that, and I sewed it up, pinned it up here so that I didn't catch that. So that's how this story on this hat come to be.
I need to do that because this one's a little floppy too. This is just a secondhand store felt hat that has been wet a lot.
Yeah.
So they get
this is actually a blank.
Yeah.
This is what the blanks they start out with, but what you can't see because I got covered up, I sewed a hat band on it. It's a deer hide hat band.
Looks pretty good.
And then I got my stampede string on it. And
you got a liner?
No, it's not lined at all.
I see. Well, let's get into cartridges. And cartridges, a lot of people don't realize that cartridges start way before the pinfire. The very first cartridges actually were in 1812, and they were considerably different. And I'm not really versed on those originals. Do you have anything to say about them?
No, because honestly, I didn't know much about the cartridges before the 22 when Smith & Wesson introduced that one. So other than paper cartridges. So
we get into the 1820s, and we get these things out of France. What did you call these, Duke? Nice words.
The little French gun.
Yeah, the little French gun. These are pinfire guns. They take a cartridge, and this is 1820s, and the cartridge itself has the firing pin built into the cartridge. So if you look at the hammer here, backwards, no firing pin on the hammer. These are actually double action revolvers. And so they're very early double actions, and you can dry fire them because there's no way you're going to hurt the firing pin because there is none. And it doesn't actually make contact with the cylinder, just the frame. But that's where we start off with cartridges. So technically cartridges exist clear back as far as the Patterson. I mean, self-contained metallic cartridges do exist clear back as far as the Patterson. They're just not very practical, shall we say.
I'd agree with that. Yeah, they're
I mean, we get a lot of stories of pinfire revolvers in the Civil War, but as far as out west in the forts and stuff like that, have you heard any records of pinfires being used by anybody?
No. The only thing you see mentioned, if anything mentioned, it's either pistol, but Colts are the only ones I've ever seen mentioned by name.
Yeah.
In that time period.
So you wouldn't think trappers would be carrying a pinfire at all? I mean, even in there, pin fires are kind of end of trapper time if you get in the 1820s and 30s.
Right. Could be, but I doubt it. There's just not. If there was, that would be something that'd be an oddball enough that you think might be mentioned. But I've never seen anything mentioned. Like I said, the only thing that gets mentioned that's not just called a pistol is when they're talking about a Colt revolver.
Yeah, and also it would have been very hard to transport the pinfire cartridges, and they were very, very fragile. And as far as you could bump the box around and a bunch of them go off because they have the firing pins on them. It's kind of like a Colt single action with the firing pin down on the cartridge all the time. So that's what's going on here, guys. So we got this, and it's always been around. So during the Colt production years anyway. So metallic cartridges are a thing, but I don't know why earlier, but Colt just never. Could you give me a reason why you don't think Colt got into the, say, 22 short market in the early 1850s with Smith & Wesson?
I don't think Colt believed they'd catch on. I really don't think he believed that. Which is why he skips out on the Roland White patent later on. He just doesn't think that metallic cartridges are going to catch on and be anything.
Yeah. So what we got going on is, let me reach down here. We got in the early 1850s, and we were actually talking about this on our live chat. We have rimfire cartridges coming out in the early 1850s. As a matter of fact, Smith & Wesson tried to develop this gun in 1853 before the Roland White patent. This is Duke's actually shot this before. This is his rat gun. This is the Smith & Wesson Model 1 and 22 short, and the way this gun works, I mean, the design was out in 1852. That's how early this thing was around. Right. If I can get it to open, but it's a top break. Actually, I should say it's a bottom break because the barrel rolls up, and then you just remove this little cylinder that looks like a spool. You'll have your cartridges in there, and you use this rod on the front of the gun to just poke your cartridges out just like that. And it's only in 22 short black powder, which if anybody is curious, that is a 22 caliber round ball sitting on top of 3 grains of powder. So it's not a man stopper in any way, shape, or form.
To be honest, I don't know if you could get enough smokeless powder to get enough ignition to get the bullet out of that.
No, I'm not. Well, you could get, I've shot smokeless powder 22 shorts in this, and it does work, but you gotta, you can do it with the bullet, but the bullet almost comes clear flush to the end of the cylinder. Like it could, unless you shave it off, it might stick out the end of the cylinder with the bullets nowadays. Right. But you can actually, I mean, when you think about 22 shorts, really not putting on enough pressure to even hurt this little cylinder, but you should probably stick with black powder in these guns. But anyway, they tried to put this thing out in 1853, and they ran smack dab into Colt's patent that says you cannot use, which he had renewed in 1847, you cannot use the hammer to index and lock the cylinder. So the hammer actually has nothing to do with the locking system on this. The locking system is this thing up here, which is spring loaded and goes down and up, but it's not moved by the hammer. Actually, it's just moved by the cylinder. And like I said, they ran into this, and Colt sued them and put them out of business. And they didn't come back into business with this until 1858 when they had the Roland White patent. You want to talk to us about the Roland White patent?
Oh, boy. See what I can remember here. I know that Roland White approached Colt about doing that patent. He was an engineer that designed, the bore-through cylinder. Colt just did not think it was going to catch on at all. And he passed him by, and then Roland White said, well, I'm going to go to somebody else then, and went to Smith & Wesson, and could have really put Colt out of business, but, for whatever reason, Colt comes back. We all know that. But, yeah, Colt could have missed out on a lot of market for a lot of years because he passed up on that Roland White patent. And it's all for that blower-through cylinder that gives you the ability to load a cartridge from the rear.
Mm-hmm. And you have to realize that Roland White's patent, I've actually looked at the patent itself. It's not an insane patent, but it's kind of like if you all are familiar with the Hall's rifle, the 1819. It's a breech loader. The main issue with it did close up pretty flush, but it leaked a lot of gas. And I think maybe that's what Colt was worried about with that design, was even though the back was because the way it worked, it would have set against the frame of the revolver with the back open, but
Right.
so it probably would have leaked gas. And I think maybe Colt was having flashbacks to when he attempted to enclose the cylinder on the Patterson.
And blew all those pistols up.
Yeah, because there's a reason a lot of guns don't have top straps even, and they're really wide open, because when you're dealing with cap and ball, those sparks need to go somewhere that's not in the other chamber. And I mean, you can get away with the top strap being on too, but that catches fouling. So that's one of the reasons I think he didn't, go with that patent. But as we move on here, so this Smith & Wesson comes out with this, and it really does really good in 1858, 22 cartridge rimfire. And we move into 1859, and William Tyler Henry starts developing, I don't know if he per se develops it, but he develops the rifle that will use the 1860 cartridge, the 1860 44 Henry. And before the 44 Henry, you have the rocket ball.
Right.
That's exciting.
Would
That's
kill a rat.
If you don't know what a rocket ball is, it's kind of like a hollow, like a mini ball or a maxi ball that's hollow in the base, so it expands and grabs the rifling. But they just filled the base up with powder and put a mercury fulminate cap on the back, and it was covered with, I guess, paper. It might have been covered with a disc,
I don't remember. It was covered with something. And then, that's how they were able to make the lever action pistols. And, they don't have a whole lot of room on those pistols. That's why nobody's making a reproduction today's, because it'd have to be so big to accommodate the cartridges. But if you look on there, the loading lever on that's only like that wide or that long on those pistols. So it's all contained there. But I can't remember if they put a disc or just a piece of paper over the back of it.
I think it's a disc, but it might be cardboard. You guys out there in the chat, correct us if we're wrong there. But the whole idea with the rocket ball was that you would send everything down the barrel, and there would just picture a Winchester rifle with no extraction port, no extractors, no dust cover, no need for any of that, just closed on the top, because everything's going down the barrel. In theory, everything is going down the barrel.
And, it's funny to bring it into modern times. The Army's been trying to develop ammunition where that happens, where you don't have brass cases. I can't remember the exact term for it, what they call that. But, ammo that, everything goes down the barrel and there's nothing to have to eject out. But they've been trying to do that for a long time and nothing's successful.
The main issue you have is if you get a dud or a squibload, there's no way to get it out. There's no opening. There's nothing. You have to disassemble the entire gun. So that's going on, and Henry doesn't like that. So he develops the 1860 Henry that we all know and love in 44 Henry, which is one of the first big bore rimfire cartridges. And it's out there, and for some reason, Colt still, I think that he thinks that he's got everything so wrapped up. He's still developing the 1860 Army at that point. So, I think he had too much on his plate to even think about it in the first place. It would be a change of machinery, and I don't think he thought the military was going to go for it that big anyway, which they didn't right off the bat.
The military was hesitant to adopt it, and that's probably why Colt was hesitant to adopt it as well, because Colt lived a lot on government contracts, and if the government ain't going to buy it, why waste time on it?
Exactly. And it turns out for a first year, government didn't buy the 1860 Army anyway. So he was kind of sitting on everything he had. And I think that was, and the thing is, you could get, even with the 44 Henry with a big bore rimfire, when you consider the Dragoon and you consider the 1860 Army, you're getting so much more power even than the 44 Henry cartridge could have delivered in its early years.
Sorry, you kind of cut out there on me.
I said that even it doesn't matter really if they had the 44 big bore Henry, rimfire, because the 1860 Army and the Dragoon were still king of the hills as far as power goes. The Army wanted to get through 6 1-inch pine boards, and if they couldn't, it was probably going to be a no-go.
Right.
And you could probably do that. Go ahead.
I was going to say, if it can get through those pine boards, it can get through a man.
Yeah. And you could probably do that out of a Henry rifle barrel, but maybe not so much out of a pistol barrel where you don't have the ability to burn all that powder anyway. Once you get past a
Right.
certain point, you're just, you're burning powder.
Wasting powder.
Yep. And so you got to compensate for that and try to get as much powder to go off as you can right then and there. But that's a different story. So we're going to get into here is there is a point where people who are kind of looking ahead into the future are like, we don't like to load this cap and ball stuff in our Colt revolvers. So they go find a gunsmith to make their cap and ball revolvers fire the 44 Henry. And I've never heard of them doing anything like a 22, but the 44 Henry is definitely one that they're going for to convert.
Yep.
And
yeah.
Go ahead. I'm going to find that picture.
Okay, yeah, because, right after the Civil War, by then cartridges are starting to become the new thing. And especially you start getting out in the West, you start seeing Henry rifles are popping up, by the 1867, 1868. I think it was 67. One of the scouts that I've been reading up on talks about having a Henry rifle that he purchased. So, cartridge guns are starting to really pop up out in the West pretty quick. And it doesn't make sense to have cartridges for a rifle and then separate cartridges or, cap ball revolvers, although, it does happen. So that's when you start seeing a couple references popping up to having their Colts converted by gunsmiths. Or the Remington converted by gunsmiths. I have a
picture right here because Remington was ahead of the game. They come out in, I believe, 1867 and just flat out buy the rights from Smith & Wesson to convert the Remington New Model Army, because with the design of that, with the top strap and everything, all you got to do is drop loading lever, pull your base pin, slap in a conversion cylinder. And this is post-war. This isn't something that's going on during the war necessarily. Right. It might be. I mean, maybe somebody's doing it, but we've always been told that those cylinders that come clear out of the gun and go back in are just you would take the back off. And of course, everything's rimfire now. So now you have your Kursk cylinders that you pull the back off and they have individual firing pins. But at this point, everything's rimfire. So you pull the back off, put your cartridges in. And when you do that, you just have little slots cut for the rim to be exposed to the hammer. And I actually have a picture here. I've showed it off a couple times. If I can get it up here in the camera. That is a Colts Dragoon converted with a Remington dropout conversion cylinder. And Colt never did that. And this was done in the mid-1860s, so that is definitely evidence of gunsmiths doing conversions early in the mid-1860s.
Yep. Yeah, so you'd be looking probably 66, 67, 68. You're starting to see a lot of those converted, because I don't remember exactly when the Thur conversion come in that Colt tried to play around with that, but it never caught on that well.
68.
68, yeah.
And we can get into that whenever you're ready.
Yeah, so it's starting to be a rapid transition. I mean, cap and ball is going out faster than it came in.
Mm-hmm.
Because the transition between cap and ball and flintlock, and the first percussion cap was invented 18 teens.
Yeah, 16 to 18, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I have a brain fart there. And, it takes up until almost the 1850s before cap really becomes prevalent out in the West, at least.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start going from the cap lock to the cartridge conversion, I mean, it's within a couple of years.
Not to say a lot of people aren't still carrying the cap and ball revolvers, but as far as military is concerned, that cap stuff is over fast.
Right. And, and anybody that's out in the West, they are trying to get their hands on anything cartridge as fast as they can. So not to say that you're not going to see percussion guns. There's even talk that Wild Bill Hickok possibly had his old cap and ball 51 Navies. Personally, I think he probably still had, or he had his conversions at that point in time.
And Smith & Wesson Model 2 was what he had on him when he died. So,
right. And
rimfire.
Possibly a third model Dragoon. And yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, the transition, it's pretty rapid. And we're not talking with revolvers, but with the muzzle loaders, the old Springfield muzzle loaders in 1860. Oh, geez, I'm having a brain fart on my years. 1866, the Fetterman fight. Anyway, December. Yeah, the Fetterman fight. All those guys are still using the muzzle loaders. They are using Spencers to some, but the Indians had learned that with the old muzzle loaders, they could do a false charge just like the Comanches did with the Texas Rangers. They found out up here, you charge in and, get them to fire off all the rounds. And then while they're reloading, you charge again and you can wipe them out. Following year, they use the same tactic. And now the Army's got the Allen conversion, which is converted the musket to the 50-70 cartridge. And they find out, holy Moses, they can't go in and do a charge because now they can reload as fast as the Indians can shoot bows and arrows.
Yeah.
So the cartridge convert it was needed out here. The cartridges they were a game changer, but lifesaver for some.
Yeah. What did they find? How many arrows in those two guys' bodies that had the Henrys up there at the Fetterman fight?
Oh God, I can't even remember.
They were not happy.
Dozen arrows, yeah. And during Indian warfare at that time period, the Indians would fill the enemy with arrows probably even after they died, because at the now I'm having a brain fart on the guy's name. The massacre that took place just down the road here from Fort Laramie, when they found that Lieutenant Grattan fight at the Grattan massacre, when they found Grattan's body, he had like 24 arrows or something in him. So I mean, they might got a little bit extra carried away on putting arrows in people, but yeah, there was a lot of arrows in them.
But you're starting to see a real common theme here in the box wagon fight, right?
Wagon box, yeah.
Wagon box fight. All these fights, you're seeing a common theme of men with Henry rifles are starting to make a big dent in the attacking Indian population.
Right. The problem is there's not that many Henry rifles there, and the ones that are there, they're in the hands of civilians. They're not in the hands of the military. Because at the Fetterman massacre, there was one company that had Spencer rifles, not carbines. They had rifles because they were actually that group was mounted infantry. Rest had, the Springfield muskets. The wagon box fight, most of the Army boys had the Allen conversion Springfield. So the old muskets converted to the 50-70, but the civilians that have the Henrys. And it just comes down to the Army is not going to buy the Henrys. Those soldiers that do have Henrys buy them out of their own pocket. There was one company out here at Fort Laramie where the company commander bought Henrys for all of his troops. And it was real cool because somebody found a Henry cartridge out there this past season. But yeah, they weren't that common. The most common one you're going to see out here that's Army issue is a Spencer carbine.
Yeah. We got a question over here from Classic Guns Today. I just happened to glance over here and notice. And he said the Colt Navy pistols had 38 rimfire, 38 short Colt Navy. Yes, I actually have a gun here. I'll show you in a minute. But he said, how will the 38 rimfire short long Colt really compare to the 44 Henry and 44 Colt cartridges? Today, we tend to compare cartridge conversions to 45 Colt in 1860 Army because that's done now. I'll let Duke carry this in just a second, but I'll tell you right now, basic ballistics you're getting out of the Henry, you're getting a 200 to 220 grain bullet getting out of that rifle, traveling 600 to 700 feet per second in a good round, maybe even less. When you load up 45 Colt with 40 grains of black powder, you can push a 255 grain bullet 1,000 feet per second out of a handgun, a 7.5 inch barrel handgun. So you're talking half the power. I've done a little study just here recently on the 44 Henry cartridge. I was just reading on it, matter of fact, with Duke last night. We were studying up a little bit, and it turns out that by the year of 1870, the 44 Henry has been beefed up considerably. And I don't know exactly why they've done that, but it has been. I don't know what the ballistics are then, but it's definitely more than it was when it started.
Yep, technology keeps changing, and cartridges adapt. Because I don't remember all the specifics on the Henry cartridge, but I've seen them with huge slugs and case length because it's a rim, or it's not a rim. It's like a 22 long rifle. It's a heel-based bullet. So that gives you can shorten up your brass and put a heavier bullet on, or you can put a smaller bullet and have more powder. They play around. I've seen some pictures of Henry cartridges where they've got a real short brass but a real long bullet on them. So they were definitely playing around with different loads.
And you have to remember they were running them in gunmetal frames that weren't exactly steel frames starting out.
Right.
By 1870, you have guns that are, especially the early Henry itself, has been converted to an iron frame. Some of them, so you're getting better guns too at that point.
Right.
Moving on here, we're getting into the Colt conversions. We talked about the Smith and Wesson. We talked about the gunsmith conversions, but we have in 1868 we have a guy named Thur coming along. And Roland White's patent is still completely enforceable. And so he comes up with an idea for a Thur bullet. You want to go ahead? Duke knows more about this than me because it's more in his time period.
Right. I don't know a lot about on the Thurs, but I'll I know a little bit. So basically, yeah, you still got the Roland White patent, which basically states you can't have a bored through cylinder that can be loaded from the back. The way that gunsmiths, Remington got around it for a while was with that cylinder that had the plate on the back. Take cylinder out, pop the plate, put bullets in, and then put it back into the gun, and that defeats the patent. Colt goes different route with Thur. Thur comes up with this idea of, all right, well, why don't we just put this ring in here with a firing pin set up in it? But instead of loading the cartridges from the back, why don't we just keep loading them from the front like we've been doing? We just make a metal cartridge, put a primer in it, it loads from the front.
Would you like me to pull up that picture?
Sure, yeah, go right ahead. Yeah,
I'm going to pull. This is a picture of a Thur conversion, and you can go through it. Well, you won't see, but pieces of us. I haven't figured all this picture thing out on live streaming, but here it is.
All right, so yeah, what you can see up there, the hammer's still intact. There's a ring. The cylinder has been trimmed down, so it's just like a conversion ring that you're going to see during the Richards Mason conversion. But this ring is a little bit more special. I'll get into that for a second. But mostly the gun's not altered. It's not cut for cartridges in the back. Loading levers are still in place because that loading lever is what you're going to seat that cartridge with. So one thing you'll notice on that ring towards the top of the picture there is there's this little piece that's got a knurled spot on it, kind of like the hammer's got knurled. And actually, this is the safest gun, safest revolver that you could ever carry, because that ring rotates on that revolver. So you can carry it fully loaded, all the cartridges in there, and when you rotate that ring, it rotates, and you let the hammer down, and it locks that ring in place to where that firing pin's not resting on a cartridge. And they're spring loaded, so that when you're ready to fire, you draw it and pull it back. That ring automatically rotates to bring the firing pin into battery. It's an ingenious design. And it probably would have caught on very well if it had been with a rear loading cartridge setup. And why Colt didn't do that with the Richards and Mason conversion, I don't know, but they wind up going with that gated system. But the idea of the firing pin mounted into the frame there, I mean, that's kind of where it gets started at.
Yeah. So that you've seen that is 1868. That is not Colt himself, of course. Colt is dead in 1862.
Right.
So
it's Colt Company.
Yes, this is actually Elijah K. Root up to a point, and then I believe in 68 we're dealing with Richard Jarvis, who is related to Elizabeth Jarvis, which is Colt's wife. But he is really driving at this point the innovation in the company. And, they're kind of like, if we can't get a bored through cylinder because the patent is held by Smith & Wesson, we're going to do something, no matter what. It's some stopgap, something that we can say, look, we have something new out. Wouldn't you say that's what's going on?
Yeah, and it's basically the company is trying to make money because they're still recovering financially from the fire, I'm sure. They lost a lot of contracts of that towards the end of the war. Then you've got the problem at the end of the war. You've got so much surplus guns on the market. Surplus Remingtons are a dime a dozen. So innovation, if you don't keep innovating, your company's not going to keep going. Got to keep the innovation going.
There are so many Remingtons on the market right now, even in the military, that we have record on record of military commanders saying, send me Colt revolvers, Colts. The government's not buying Colts 1860. They want it, but the government keeps sending him these Remingtons, and there are some pretty nasty letters. I believe I read one to you the other day where this guy was just incensed that they would send Remingtons when he needed Colts on the frontier.
Right. So yeah, it's a tough period, and the country's in economic turmoil to say the least. But they're still trying to come up. They're realizing now cartridges are going to be the way to go, and that Roland White patent has pretty much kept keeping them from making anything, from keeping up. So the Thur idea was something that we might make some money on it, but doesn't really catch on all that well.
No, because at that point you might as well just be loading paper cartridges in your
right
cap and ball revolver. It's not a big.
And honestly, yeah, I mean, if you're going to stick a cartridge in from the front, it better be dissolvable, because what happens if that brass cartridge follows a bullet halfway down and it gets caught in the chamber?
Oh, I've never seen that happen. Never seen that happen at all. But anyway, so we're getting some pretty extensive developments going on around the world, and people have heard me harp before on the Adams Dragoon revolvers, the big 50 calibers that were going on over there in England at this point. And about this time, a guy named Webley starts developing some of his earliest revolvers. And I actually purchased a RIC, a Royal Irish Constabulary revolver. It was supposed to have been here for this, but it's in Wichita right now, going to be here tomorrow, so I guess we just don't have it. But what it is they've taken the 45 caliber, kind of smaller gun that they were using, the Adams revolver, and they bore through that, dude, and they make one of the first centerfire. I mean, it's not the first centerfire, but as far as I can tell, probably one of the earliest military mass adoptions of a centerfire in the 450 Adams, and this happens in 1868. And these things are selling, like hotcakes, and they're not necessarily all staying in England. They're coming to America. Most of them are coming through Canada, to be quite honest, and they're coming into America, and people in America now have a double action centerfire cartridge. It's not real powerful. It shoots a 220 grain bullet over 14 grains of black powder in this little, because they've got this fairly small cylinder on this particular gun. And eventually they will chop the front of it off and call it the British Bulldog, which will become massively popular in the West, as far as I know. And so Colt's looking around now. They have Smith & Wesson with their rimfire revolvers. They have Remington with their conversion revolvers. They have Webley with their Bulldog revolvers. And then in 1869, Smith & Wesson really, shall we say, breaks the glass ceiling when they bring out this thing. Not exactly this one. This is the Schofield, but the Model 3. They bring that thing out in 1869, and Colt has no answer. It's a big centerfire 44 American, big military-style handgun that has a lot of power. You got anything to say about the Smith & Wesson Model 3, dude?
Yeah, it's a lot better than the Schofield from the reproduction that I handled, but yeah, and it's a wonder that Schofield didn't take over Army contracts at that point, because they were ahead of Colt in the game. And I think it was just luck, and probably Colt had a little bit of hands in some pockets in Washington that kept them from losing their contracts. But yeah, you're starting to see that transition where, you realize cartridges are really getting set in, and the Roland White patent is still keeping all the competitors out of business for a few years.
As near as we can tell, in July of 1870, Roland White goes to court to try to prolong his patent in the exact same way that Colt did, but for some reason he fails. He does not get that thing renewed. The bored-through cylinder is wide open, and everybody in the country takes off.
Yep, because as soon as that happens, you start seeing the Richards Mason conversions being done at the Colt factory. You see the 71, 72 open tops come out. Remington starts playing around with their conversions a lot heavier. And they're going to wind up leaving Smith & Wesson crying in the dirt.
Mm-hmm. And it's I don't know what it is. I do know what it is. All these years, Colt has not necessarily been spending all his time developing the firearms as he has been developing the machinery to make such firearms. and he has invested heavily and the company itself has invested heavily in people. I mean, right now you have Elijah K. Root and Richard Jarvis at the head of the company, and these people know innovation and they know machinery and they know how to keep a 10-hour a day workforce going all day, all night, and they know they have the ability to crank out more firearms. Smith & Wesson had to see that writing on the wall, and I would think. But Colt, we would think, would come out with his first one would be a big bore revolver, right? Well, no, I have a picture right here. This is Colt's very first official cartridge firing gun. This right here. This is the Colt Model 1 Derringer, and it's actually made in 1871, about 6 months after Roland White's patent expires, and it's actually because they bought a company. And that company was called, let me look here. I got to stop and think if it's National or American. I can't remember what it's called right now off the top of my head here. National Arms Company. National Arms Company had been making this actually under the Remington contract. If you look at it here, you can see that the barrel actually tips sideways. You have a button here. You have a hammer. Your knuckle goes up in here. The barrel would tip sideways, and this would accept one rimfire 41 caliber cartridge, which is the pretty common Derringer cartridge for Remington at the time. And it actually did not do as well as Colt thought it would. So that's actually the first cartridge Colt gun officially made. Rear loading cartridge Colt gun officially made in Colt. And then after that, they would go on to the Model 2 Derringer, which is this right here. Still the same concept, but you can see it's opened up a little more. It's smaller. Still, I believe this. Yeah, you can get it in, I think, 32 rimfire now and 41 rimfire. And that one doesn't take off either until they go out and they find Thur, who had been making their conversions for them. And he comes up with a Derringer design that will actually work. And that is the third model Thur Derringer, which is this one right here. As you can see, the barrel tips sideways. There's a lot less going on in here. The gun is what we would think of as a Derringer. It's really small, fit in the palm of your hand, has that nice bird's head grip. This is officially the first bird's head grip that Colt uses. And it's on this third model Derringer, which is a cartridge gun in 41 rimfire. And I've been studying a lot on those because they're coming up pretty soon in the history of handguns. Colt, you got any stories on those Derringers, dude?
No, nothing specific, because Derringers just kind of, if you ever see them in the records, they're just considered Derringer. That's just kind of the blanket term for them.
Yeah, and the thing is, with this era between 68 and 73, there's not a lot of records on these guns because they're overshadowed by the 1860 in the back and the 73 single action in the front. And so this is kind of a very interesting era of Colt firearm design that doesn't get discussed very much. So moving on, and I'm going to let Duke take this over here in just a minute because I know that he's got some information on some of these coming up, but I don't even have to have a picture because I have the next Colt revolver. 1871 and 72, the country is actually going into a recession, and Colt is in trouble. And the one gun that is still out there selling more guns than they are is this Smith & Wesson Model 1. Because it's cheap, it's small, it's cheap to shoot, it's a cartridge gun, and you can carry it in your pocket, and it's just going like hotcakes. So Richard Jarvis says, if you can make a 22 with a top strap that's a little big and a little heavy, I bet we can take and make a 22 that's just a little smaller. And they do, and this is known as the open top 22. And it's basically the same gun. Once again, we're against the grain and not putting a top strap on it. And it's made out of a completely brass frame. So, guys, this is a Colt revolver originally with a brass frame. I get a kick out of that. But actually, this thing sells so well. I have a book coming. Once again, it's not here. I had a lot of things planned out for tonight that didn't quite make it. But according to sources, this little gun saves the company in the recession. And there's a book out there called Richard Jarvis and the 22 Open Top Hold the Line. And I wish I had it here to show you, but it's going to get here in the next couple days. Any thoughts on that? You think that Colt should have been trying to keep up with that with your rat gun?
Well, if it saves the company, yeah, it was a good idea. But yeah, that's one thing that Colt learned, early on. Sam Colt personally learned is you got to make sure you got a civilian market covered. You got to make sure you got your government market covered, because you can't rely too heavily on one or the other, or you're going to fail.
Yes. And also at this same time, this is a really busy time for Colt because they start cranking out what they call the new line. I'll drop a picture right here. This is a new line in 32 caliber, and it does have the top strap. It's a 32 caliber rimfire. This is made to directly compete with the Smith & Wesson Model 1.5 that was going pretty good at the time. 32 rimfire, a little more power. You see it's got this fancy little ring here on the side that you don't see unless you go back to the root revolver. Now, I've heard some people, matter of fact, one of my favorite gun channels the other day put a video up, and I know that slips can be made, but he said, this is the very first Colt revolver with a top strap. And that always throws me a red flag because we've had this thing since 1855. This is the root revolver.
Right.
And if you see, it's got kind of that same spring set up inside of the frame as the new line. And I had no clue that the new line came in a 22, a 32, and the 41 long Colt centerfire. You told me about that. You said you seen one the other day.
Which one's that? The
41 long Colt centerfire in that little handgun.
Yeah, I don't remember where it was, but yeah, I've seen one. Wasn't too long ago. Didn't seem like. Maybe I don't remember exactly where I seen it at, but yeah, it was neat little gun, but way too much money for me. I can guarantee you that.
What was it going for? I haven't even priced them.
I don't remember. It was over 1,000. I know that.
Yeah. But they weren't done yet. And like I said, guys, I'm going to let Duke talk a little more here in a minute. But at the same time as they're turning all these out in 71, this is a great time for Colt. They are innovating and moving on, just like if Sam Colt was alive, because this thing comes out. This is the house model Cloverleaf. Once again, a brass frame gun in 41 rimfire. But you see these massive flutes on this thing. Let me draw this up. And there are brass frame, but they were all nickel plated. So a brand new one would have looked similar to this one. This is called the Colt House Pistol Cloverleaf. And you could get it with the fluted cylinders or with just a round cylinder. Like I said before, a little less powerful. This is a 41 rimfire, not 44. It's like a Derringer round. It's a small pistol. But just take a look at these flutes, guys. That is pretty insane to me. Right now, we're kind of locked into a battle trying to buy one of these things, and hopefully we'll know by tomorrow night if we get it or not. But this is a cool little gun. You got any thoughts on these, Duke?
Yeah, they're a cool gun, but that just something about it. They're just ugly and don't look practical.
Well, it's the first time they have something they call a house gun. We've had the belt gun, the pocket gun,
right,
holster gun. Now we got a house gun because evidently you don't take it out of the house and show it off or something like that.
Yeah, I guess 4 shots is enough for inside the house. But yeah, it's like I don't know that cylinder, the way that cylinder sets, it just does not look like that would be a it's definitely not for carrying. That's probably why it's called a house gun.
Yeah, it's really interesting. They didn't make very many of these, around 30,000, so they are kind of pricey if you find them today, if you find them.
Right.
Are you ready to move on to military trials of 72?
Let's do it.
Go for it.
All right. So yeah, that's when you start seeing because I think the Army they adopted the Richards Mason conversion for a short time. And I'm pretty sure those were in the 44 Henry. And at the same time, you've got Colt producing specifically for the military the 72 open top. And I didn't realize this. I thought the 72 open top was in 44 Colt centerfire, but Garrett pointed out to me, and then I realized, oh crap, he's right. The 72 open tops were actually all made for 44 Henry rimfire for the Army, because they're already using the 44 Henry. They've got those bullets. It would make sense just to continue using those
for the military
until the Army decides. The military's like, these don't really pack enough punch coming out of that revolver. Let's beef it up a little bit, and maybe beef up the gun, make it a little stronger. And
want to talk about that 72 open top before we move on?
Yeah, I was setting the stage up, but yeah.
Go ahead, go. I'm sorry. Move on.
Yeah, so you're going to see it transition in the following year, and the following year is going to be a big year for guns, not just for Colt, but for several companies. But the Army, in the end, doesn't adopt it. So the 72 open top is only, what was it? You said 7,000 units?
7,000.
7,000. So about 7,000 of them made. The Army doesn't really adopt them. But Colt can still play those on the civilian market. So they wind up going eventually into the civilian market. But the Richards Mason conversion is going to get produced clear up until 1878. So one thing that I'd read a couple years ago was that in the mid 1870s, you had basically two holster size Colts available. You had the 73 single action was going to come out later, and then you had the Richards Mason conversions, which the Richard Mason conversion was going for like $8, $10, $12 depending on where you was at. So it basically was providing the civilian market a cheaper option. Mm-hmm. And so your cowboys that couldn't afford the brand new fancy one, well, they could buy one of those Richard Mason conversions, and they got a cheap gun. And being as they were a cheap gun, the cowboys didn't treat them as nice, because there's examples of them out there of them being used for hammers. The buttstock is all peened up from being hammered nails into a fence or whatever.
You want to go back and cover the I forgot all about that. You want to go back and cover the conversions of the Richards and the Masons. I'll bring the first one up. This is the Richards only, or the otherwise known as the Type 1. You want to talk about that, Duke?
Right. Yep. So this is the early one. And basically this is the cap and ball. That's the cap and ball barrel, the original barrel as it was on an 1860 Army. They have designed an ejector rod that fits into the loading lever port. And then they've cut the cylinder back. They've also cut the frame back to take that conversion ring. And in that conversion ring, you have a firing pin mounted in the ring. The hammer has been cut back so that it hits that. And once they cut the hammer back, there's no rear sight on the hammer anymore. So that conversion ring has the rear sight mounted to it.
Yeah, and I had a picture here if I could find it. I might not have got it downloaded of the firing pin. I was sure I had it here. Anyway, if you look at the firing pin, okay, here it is. Here we go. All right, this is the frame-mounted firing pin down here on the right. And you can see we have sights up here on the ring itself and not in the hammer.
Yep.
But this is the Richards Type 1, and it does have a spring-loaded, frame-mounted firing pin like you would find on many of your cheap 22s today.
Right.
So do you think
it was pretty expensive to produce those, and that's why they didn't continue with that.
You think they were the first ones to put a spring-loaded, frame-mounted firing pin in a revolver?
I've never seen anybody else that tried it, so.
I mean, it's a good idea. Like you said, it's just too expensive. And so
it's a little bit ahead of its time.
Yeah, so then we're going to go ahead and move on to the second transition. They call them transition. This is the Richards Mason, or the Type 2 conversion. You notice anything different there, don't you, Duke?
Yep. So this is kind of where your modern reproductions, your common ones are, although now they have a fairly good reproduction of the Type 1, except for they're still not using the frame-mounted firing pin. So this one, it's still the same frame as the old cap and ball. The barrel now are being made. They're being purpose produced because they're not having the loading lever ports cut into them. So instead, the ejector rod is mounted. There's a little screw hole where that screw hole will go where the loading lever would attach. They attach the ejector rod there. Still cutting the cylinder, still cutting the frame back, putting in a conversion ring. Only now, instead of mounting the firing pin in the conversion ring, they've stepped back. Now they're mounting the firing pin into the hammer and leaving the old style sights still in the hammer and the hammer face. So your rear sight is gone back to the cap and ball style, and
Yeah,
it's a little bit cheaper to produce.
If you look at this firing pin right here, it's kind of representative of all the black powder cartridge firing pins, as in it's a really fat, stout firing pin, whereas when you see in your smokeless powder era single action armies, they tend to get thinner out there toward the end.
Right.
Well, just go back here, guys, and let's just look right quick one more time at this loading lever setup. This is the first loading lever, and like he said, this one is mounted in – okay, it's not the loading lever, sorry, the ejector rod. It's mounted in the loading lever port itself, whereas down here we're mounting it in the wedge port there. Right? Am I correct?
Right. No, it's where the screw where that loading lever would pivot on that one.
Okay, well, these things weren't just in center fire, though, guys, because I have right here a Richards Mason Type 2 conversion, 1851. This is original gun, original conversion. But if you look at that hammer, this is a rimfire. If you look down in there, no firing pin in the frame, just a slot on the side of the frame there where the edge of the cartridge is. And what they're doing is they're just taking and mounting this. It's hard to make out, I know, but this firing pin actually mounts to the side of the hammer and only sticks out there on one side. It's actually a very easy, probably the easiest of all the conversions to do. This one has been in my brother-in-law's family since before it was converted. They converted it. It's been on this ranch that long, but it's a really cool thing. And this is, like you said, we got the ejector rod here mounted in the screw hole. Screw hole's right there. This gun still has the hole for the loading port, or not the loading port, but for the ramrod, because this was not made as a conversion by Colt. This was a cap and ball revolver that my brother-in-law's family had during the Civil War. And after the Civil War, the guy liked it so much. His name was Alexander Porter Draper. He liked it so much, as soon as it was available, he sent this into Colt and had it converted to 38 rimfire. And I got a box 38 rimfire, and as soon as I'm able, we're going to go give this a try.
Yeah, but some of the early ones, they were rimfire, because 1871, 72 is when you're starting to transition from the rimfire to the center fire. But in 1871, the 44 Colt's going to start popping up. So you're starting to see that transition pretty rapid. And it's going to continue on. And as Colt starts to develop later on in 73, that's where your final transition takes place. But at one point in time, these 73 single actions, there's a couple of them out there that are rimfire. They were made for 44 Henry rimfire.
And 44 Henry was actually produced in small numbers even up until World War I. And you were still getting some people producing small batches. I believe Remington, even UMC, and a few people. After World War I, the big bore rimfire stuff was done. But people were still carrying and using those big bore rimfires even up to that point. Almost all the boxes you're going to find, you can find smokeless rimfire 38 and 44 nowadays. I mean, it's made, between 1900 and 1920, but there was a lot of them produced in that era, in that time period.
Yeah, and the 66 Henry, the 66 Winchester was rimfire for a long time. So they were there around. The rimfire era of the cartridge era was short-lived, but it was pretty important.
Yeah, and I don't know how many, but I've heard that a few of the 66s were converted to, and you're saying that, were they actually ever made, in 4440, or were some of them just converted to 4440?
Converted, because I don't know. I know for a fact the first ones were 44 Henry. But I don't know once centerfire took off how long it took before they started producing those into the 4440.
And I know this isn't Colt, guys, but if you're out there, I haven't been looking at the chat. You might tell us how easy is it should be. Pretty easy to drop 73 parts into a 66. You'd think.
You would think, but yeah, nothing's ever that easy. But I always thought, like I said before, I'd always thought that the Colt, the 72 open tops were 44 centerfire. No, the ones you find were ones that were converted later on.
Yeah. Well, let's get into that. In 1872, in the trials, Colt decides to build a revolver from the ground up. The 72, this is still one of the military revolvers. This is the 1860 Army. This is the original.
Yep.
And you can see it's got what Duke calls a belted cylinder. I call it the rebated cylinder, where the cylinder goes down into the frame. And, the cylinder's a certain length. Well, the Colt decides to come up and build one from the ground up, and I believe Mason did most of this. This is the 72 open top. This is a modern replica, so it's not right in a lot of ways. You see that massive long firing pin on there? That wouldn't have been on most. Maybe some of them that were converted, but I'll show you a picture here. Here is a 72 open top original. And it's hard to make out. It's kind of fuzzy, but if you look up there, you'll see the same firing pin setup as was on that 51 Navy I just showed you.
Yep.
And they're trying to, I don't know if it's because they have the conversions already on the market that they're trying to save their conversions by making military caliber. We've been talking about this. I don't know what their thinking was, but they chambered those in 44 rimfire when they had 44 Colt centerfire on the market.
Right. Yeah, I think it comes down. That's probably what the military wanted. But until you find a letter of correspondence related to them, it's going to be hard to tell.
There's not a lot of info out there on them. I've been looking.
Yeah,
it's kind of a really scarce thing. There was a little batch of 7,000 of them made. They made the first. They were made from 71 to 70, technically 73, but they weren't really making them at the end of 72, as far as I can tell, because they were developing the 73. And what you're going to find is the first year, the 71, the first year production, you're going to see Navy style grips on them. And then second year production, you're going to see Army style grips on them with a longer grip.
Right.
And so if you guys have one that's got a Navy grip on it, you're replicating a 71 open top. If you have one, technically, it could overlap. But if you have one with the Army style grip like mine right here, you're replicating the 72 open top.
Yep.
Why didn't the government like these, Duke?
Didn't have a top strap, and they figured out, well, 44 Henry, that's just a little too weak for us. We need something a little more potent.
Mm-hmm. And there really wasn't anything a lot more potent other than the 44 American that Smith & Wesson had out, 44 Russian, possibly out by then.
Right. Yeah, because those are, just basically, a shortened version of the 44 Special. Or I should say 44 Special is a more potent version of those. But yeah, they wanted something a little bigger, a little harder hitting. And I don't know why the Army didn't want or wanted a top strap. But for whatever reason, they decided, yeah, we've got to have a top strap on it. So Colt goes back to the drawing board again.
I'm going to let you take this one.
Okay. So, yeah, they go back to the drawing board. And basically, it's the same gun, but now they've made a complete frame, put a top strap on it, and now they've got a new cartridge, 45 Colt, which is, 250 grain bullet, going anywhere from 8 to 900 feet per second. Black powder load, of course. And it goes to the Army trials, and the Army decides, hey, that's the one we want to have.
Yeah, that if you in the early cartridges are 40 grain powder, they would back it down a little after that because it was just, I think they thought it was too much, but they did back it down to 30 grains. Was that the military loading of the 80s?
I don't remember in the 80s. I just know the 70s designation because it was the 40. Civilian market called it 45 Colt. Military called it the 45 40 250.
Yeah.
Which is 45 caliber, 40 grains of powder, 250 grain bullet.
And this gun actually went through military trials. probably more so than most of the Colts went through military trials. Would you say?
Right.
Uh,
Colt wasn't going to give up on a military contract.
And they're fighting tooth and nail right now because they're actually fighting Smith & Wesson and several others. Remington would come on in a year or so. And, I mean, everybody.
Remington's trying to come in. Because once Colt gets those contracts, I mean, everybody's trying to compete. This is a cutthroat era. Winchester is trying to get in with their lever action rifles. The Army is redeveloping the Springfield trapdoor from the musket to a purpose-made rifle. So, it's fierce competition, 1873, no doubt.
Gun development is at the height, and it probably never will be at that height again, ever, as it was that year. You have the trapdoor, you have the Winchester 73, and you have the Colt 73. You have Springfield, Winchester, Colt, and several others actually in production at that time. Remington's in production with their 75. I mean, they're working on it, and they're just a little late to the game. Otherwise, they probably would have took a big chunk of this military contract.
Right, and Smith & Wesson's come out with their Model 3.
Yeah.
Because that one doesn't pass the Army trials. Remington, they're in the process of making a Colt with the old-fashioned webbing on it. It's fierce competition.
From what I've read, Colt even attempted to enter the Richards Mason in 44 Colt, but at that point they're like, they've been used to Remingtons at this point. They've had 5 or 6 years of that top strap, and I think they're really sold on that.
Right. But one thing that I'll give Colt credit for, everybody says Colt stole the idea of the top strap from Remington. No, we've already established that. They was playing around with it long before Remington was even a thought. But one thing that Colt got right over Remington on the top strap design is that inside this gun here, inside that cylinder, is a bushing.
Mm-hmm.
And that bushing system allows 2 points of rotation. And with black powder fouling, that's why I can take a Remington and within 40 rounds it's locked up and I got to clean it. I can put 400 rounds through this Colt and it might drag a little bit, but it's going to keep going because it's got that 2 bushing system that allows the fouling. It can work through the fouling. It keeps rotating on it.
I actually have, guys, the entire, and Duke does too, at his disposal, and he's read it before, but the entire 1872, 73, and later on, even 75, they're still attempting to get some guns in because Remington's still trying to get in there, and they're like, we could put that bushing in, and the military was like, we already have Colt. You would just have literally the same gun as Colt at that point. So why would we change? And what he's talking about, guys, is, and most of you know this, of course, but if you look at the end of that cylinder right there, you see that little bitty hole. Well, that little bitty hole becomes a bigger hole when you pull the bushing out. And in the military trials, if you read them, what you're going to find is Smith & Wesson, we got 45, 50 rounds through it, and it stuck. Remington, even the conversion cylinder Remingtons they were trying at the time, 45, 50 rounds through it, and it stuck. Colt, you're talking 1,200 rounds nonstop without it sticking. And so that was a really big deal for the military. That was what sold them on the Colt. Now, they didn't do away with the Smith & Wesson, of course. And you want to get in, I'm not I have a general working knowledge of the caliber war between Colt and Smith & Wesson. You want to get into that and why it happened the way it did?
But right before I do that, I'll give a word to the wise. So if you got one of these 73 single actions, even though this bushing system in there is designed to help, prevent locking up from fouling, you want to make sure to take that apart and clean it after you shoot black powder. This is my 4440, and years ago I shot black powder through it, and I didn't take that bushing out to clean it, and that bushing has pretty well seized up in there and won't come out. The gun still works fine with black powder loads, but that bushing won't come out of there.
Yeah.
So when you clean it, pull the bushing out.
Exactly. Go ahead though and expound on the
Yeah.
cartridge differences in the 45 Schofield and the 45 Colt, and why it went one way and not the other.
Right. So about I think it was a little bit later, 1875-ish. I'm trying to put my cylinder back in my gun here at the same time as I'm talking. Yeah, screw it. I'll deal with it later. So 1875-ish, an Army officer, Schofield, who was out here at Fort Laramie for a short time. I can't remember his rank either. Anyway, he liked the Smith & Wesson over the Colt design for whatever reason. But, you know, he thought it needed to have a few improvements. So he's going to change it around, you know, instead of having to have two hands to open it up, because you have to pull up on the release on the Smith & Wesson number 3, all the Smith & Wessons pretty much at that point. Redesigns it to where you can do it with one hand. You pull back on the release and the gun tips open. If you got that Smith there, you can pull it up there. Garrett,
Schofield. Yeah, here.
Yeah, so he designs it with that where it can be pulled back to open the gun. And so it can be done one-handed. And so the Army says, all right, we'll start looking at that. One problem is, though, is for whatever reason, they couldn't go with the 45 Colt. And there's a couple different reasons why. They said, one, well, the cylinder wasn't long enough. Well, obviously, that's not that big a problem, because Birdie can make one with a cylinder long enough for 45 Colt today. I'm sure Smith & Wesson could have done that back then. And the other one that I'm more willing to believe is that Smith & Wesson, that one wouldn't handle that 45 Colt cartridge for whatever reason. Or it was Smith & Wesson couldn't get the rights to produce it for the 45 Colt cartridge. So what they do is they shorten up the 45 Colt cartridge, and the originals had a little bit different in the case head diameter, the rim diameter. But you know, it's basically it's a smaller version of the 45 Colt. You can almost call it the 45 short Colt if you wanted to. So it goes through testing, and the Army, for whatever reason, decides not to adopt it. Although there were units that were issued, there was small amounts of those issued out to troops. And the Army come down and said, well, you know, really, it's not that much advantage over the Colt, really. So they kept the Colt guns. However, the Army, for whatever reason, thought, well, we've issued a few of these Schofields, and we've got all these Colts. So instead of trying to keep track of all the different bullets we need for them, why don't we just adopt the 45 Schofield? We can shoot those through our Colts too. So the Army winds up adopting and using the 45 Schofield round for a long time.
And they will go back. Let's go over here to some questions. And I seen quite a few of those. Snapper was even saying that he was talking about, we got Snapper 44 Colt and the 72 open top, and we have Classic Guns Today talking about wasn't the 44 Colt, and we thought that too. I always assumed that it was a centerfire and 44 Colt, but I haven't found that.
Yep.
I've looked all over. I've looked at
the Richards and Mason,
Richards Mason and 44 Colt, but unless one was converted, I just haven't found a record of a factory 1872 open top, which is not the Richards Mason. It's its own gun coming out in anything but 44 Henry. If you guys find it, I would be more than happy to eat my words, because it would make sense. But
I did a lot of looking last night and the other night online, and all the originals I found pictures of originals. They're all rimfire, right? And one of them was a centerfire. So
yeah,
that was news to me too.
There's Haven and Belden has a grand total of one paragraph on that gun, and all they say about it is it's built from the ground up to be a 44 Henry revolver. So that's just what that is. If you guys find anything about that, like I said, let me know, because I sure would like to find it myself. And I know some of you guys have a lot of knowledge on such things. But we're getting into they're dumbing down the Colt rounds at that point. It's not as potent as it was when it first comes out. I know that the military is they're using these things all over the place. The Battle of Little Bighorn, the Greasy Grass. I don't know how many are there, because I'm sure not Was every mounted trooper armed with a Colt or 2 Colts?
One Colt. Everybody had one Colt. Everybody had a trapdoor carbine. That was standard issue for Cav. Now, infantry, very rarely infantry issued a pistol, but Cav were always issued pistol, carbine, and saber. Although at the Little Bighorn, they didn't have their sabers with them because sabers were really starting to go by the wayside at that point.
Yes, that's 76. And what I found interesting is in my study recently that I always assumed that Custer carried a Colt or a Smith & Wesson. But from what I have discovered, he was carrying a Webley fairly close. They think, anyway. There's different stories, but the only gun missing he has a picture of all his guns in his gun collection, him sitting in front of it right before that. The only gun not found from that collection is his Webley. And he has records of people saying that he was carrying that Webley that day. But some people still think it was Smith & Wesson's, but I think it was the Webley.
If I remember reading right, I think he had a pair of them.
Yeah, pearl handle.
Yep. And that was common. Officers didn't always carry what the troopers were issued. Because like in the Black Hills expedition, Custer had a rolling block 50-70.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he carried. And I think he carried that at the Little Bighorn too, if I'm not mistaken.
Did he shoot any dentists?
No, he didn't try to see if a plank wall could stop a 50 caliber bullet.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, if any of you that was on the chat there missed that, we'll put that up there at the end before we cut off.
Yeah, I'm gonna see here. This is Duke's attempt at memeing, and I thought it was pretty good. Oh, he had some more too, but we'll probably leave them off the chat.
Yeah, one might get a little bit on the raunchy side. The other one, it's not as funny. But that one, I thought that was the best of them.
Yep. We're still moving on here. We're getting into the 1880s. I mean, in reality, the military doesn't actually stick with the single action army that long. I mean, you're talking maybe 20 years. I mean, look how long they stuck with the 1911.
Right. Yeah, the 1911, I think, has got the longest service history. But what's funny is 1911 and the single action army, you've got about the same amount of stopping power between those two bullets.
Mm-hmm. Once you bump it up to smokeless, you get a lot of juice out of that gun.
It's just that now you got one more round and you can shoot it a lot faster.
But going back, Colt did develop, and we will do a part 3 of this series, but we're going to have to take some time to study it so it's at least coherent. But we'll do a part 3 where we go from the 77 up to the 1911. But Colt's developing double action revolvers in 77 and 78 and onward because that Webley is taking such a big chunk of the American market, in my opinion.
Yep.
It's one of the reasons they do it. And in 1889, they come out with the 1889 Navy, and it is the first swing-out cylinder revolver. And it takes the world by storm. Well, I always say that. I never say first, never say biggest, best, or first on YouTube because somebody's going to come up with something different. There were some European guns. There were some
European guns. That brings the question, though. Did the Winchester revolver predate that?
Technically, yes, it did, and they used that Winchester revolver as a design because they actually got the rights to that somehow.
Right.
But Winchester.
Well, I was going to say because if you look at a Smith & Wesson and you look at that Winchester, I think Smith got rights to it. I think Colt got rights to it. It's just that Colt went one way and Smith went the other way.
Yeah, that revolver for Winchester was actually designed by Mason. Did you know that?
Right.
He had a breakup with Colt, and he went to Winchester and designed that revolver. The same guy that made the conversions way back when. But if you guys want to know more about the Winchester revolver, Ian has some stuff on Forgotten Weapons. Basically, the deal was Winchester and Colt always had an agreement that it was called the backdoor agreement, where Winchester would not produce a revolver if Colt would not produce a rifle. Colt started dabbling in the rifles, and Winchester made a revolver that made Colt set up and say, "Whoa, this could be bad." And so they agreed that they would quit making the rifles, and Winchester would quit making the revolvers. Winchester never put the revolver on the market. Colt took a lot of the ideas from that revolver and made the first swing out cylinder. But like Duke's saying, that is actually a Winchester design.
Yep.
But the reason
if Winchester hadn't have went with that agreement, who knows? They might have got the contract.
that would have been funny. Winchester hasn't had a lot of military contracts in their life. That would have been
not U.S.
funny.
military contracts, that's for certain. Yeah.
But I say
But
all this.
you know what? They say that the Winchester was a rifle that won the West, and the Indians, yeah, they did a pretty good job at trying to prove that.
Yep. And I say all this because at this time, every time Smith & Wesson makes a round, Colt makes it and calls it Colt. You know, you got the 38 short Colt, which is 38 Smith & Wesson, and you got 38 police. You got the 38 Colt police round later on, which is just a 38 Smith & Wesson. But they both come out with these 38 revolvers right around 1889, and the military adopts them real fast until we get into the Philippines, where we have this issue of that's not enough power to stop these people that are wrapped up in bandages real tight and high on drugs. And the officers are trying to shoot them with their pistols, and they can't take them down with these 38s. So what do? They bring back out the old Colt Single Action Army with a few improvements. They don't want that big barrel anymore, do they?
Nope.
We get into the artillery Single Action Armies at that point.
Right. And also, you know, they start developing, I think it's about the same time they developed the double action in 45 Colt. So they beefed that 38 up to a 45 Colt.
Mm-hmm. The new service.
Yep. The new service revolver. Yep.
But they make what collectors call the artillery Colts, where it's kind of hard nowadays to find a military 7.5-inch Colt because they cook them and they cut the barrels off to 5.5 inches.
Yep.
And you'll see a lot of military Colts when in reality, they should have all originally been 7.5-inch Colts.
Right. And I think Colt, he was producing the 5.5 inches was 77.
Mm-hmm. He put out the 7.5 and the 4 3/4, just like this one, early on, but it was really hard for a civilian to get a Colt for the first few years. When you see like in 1883, everybody has 3 or 4 single action armies on their hip. That would have been really hard to pull off because the military was buying so many of them, and they were expensive.
I mean, they were common out here, but they were definitely a little bit harder to find. That's why the Richards Mason conversions being produced up until 1878. That's covering the civilian market.
Yeah.
So prior to 78, it's going to be difficult to get your hands on one of these. By 1880, yeah, they're going to start to be pretty common out there.
Yeah, but from what I can tell, the 4 3/4 like this, what they now call the gunfighter length, is the most common for the civilian market. Everybody wanted one of these.
Well, I always thought it was the 5.5 because I think Mike Bellevue talked about that. Yeah, the 5.5 was the one that was most popular.
You might be right. I just know that this one was fairly popular, but that wasn't the only. They did in 7.5, or they did in 7.5, 5.5, 4 3/4. But you also have the stubby shopkeepers, and I just happen to have a similar one right here. It's 3.5, but an original shopkeeper wouldn't have had the ejector rod on there for the reason of even with this one, if you. The reason they didn't make very many of these snub-nosed ones is because of the ejector rod. If you watch that there, that ejector rod gets out that far. And
just enough that you grab the rim with your fingernail and flick it out.
And so they didn't make a whole lot of those in. And if they did make them in less than 4 3/4, they generally did not have an extractor rod here. Let me show you the difference. This is a single action Army 4 3/4. I know I'm pointing it at myself, but it's empty. And you can see that ejector rod goes a long ways out.
Yep.
Let's talk about these frame differences for a minute. The pre-1884 frame, I believe. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep. The one that's got the screw in the bottom. Yep.
And it doesn't have the pop over, as Duke says, the dinky. And they refer to these erroneously as black powder frames. They put the plunger in before smokeless powder because they
Right.
put that in the mid 1880s before they were even thinking about smokeless powder yet. But yeah, they call this the black powder frame, and few differences are that sight, if you can see it, probably can't see it, is super narrow, and the front blade is very thin. Do you have a pre-war model there, Duke? I don't have one.
With the thin blade or with the wide one?
With the wide blade.
Yeah, my 73, my 4440 is the.
Oh,
It's
you
actually
have the
this is the
Cattleman?
newer one.
Okay, does that
Yeah.
Cattleman have the plunger in it for pegging the base pin,
Yeah.
or has it got the screw? So show us that plunger. All right, see guys, that's something we get into in the mid 1880s, whereas pre 1880s we have this screw and no plunger, and most of you already know that. And if you look at the end, point that at us, Duke, you'll notice the ejector rod end is quite a bit different as well.
Yep.
What do they call
You got
that
a crescent instead of. This is the crescent style, and then yours is the bullseye.
Bullseye style. And I have a crescent style down here too, but you can put that bullseye on. A lot of people did even later. It gets more finger on the ejector rod, but at the same time, the other one fits in a holster better.
Yep, and that's a pretty easy swap out too. But to be honest with you, between the two, I prefer the old style. I prefer the sights. I can get a finer sight picture, and I prefer, the dingus not coming undone and flying off, and then your cylinder working its way out of the gun.
The only thing I can say that I don't like about the screw models is, of course, I only have replicas. I know that Snapper and some of those guys out there have original black powder frame Colts, but these replicas have a safety design where you can push the base pin clear through the back and make it a safety. And on this screw, that makes it a little hard for me to get the screw aligned on it sometimes. How about you? You ever have that trouble?
Yeah, that's what he's talking about there. So the one that's towards the front of that knob is the safety notch, and then the one to the back is the firing notch. And if you don't get the right one in the right spot, it won't go off because it actually blocks a hammer. But I found if you keep the hammer down when you put it in, that helps a lot.
Before we get into 1900s Colt single action army, let's go over here to the chat. And Wild Snapper said, I have studied the 5.5 was the most common, but later on, a lot of people cut the 7.5 and the 5.5 down to 4 3/4. That's why 4 3/4 is the most common today. Oh, so that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, actually. So 5.5 was from the factory the most. Yeah. He says, Texas Classic Guns Today said the Texas Rangers sure love the Winchester rifles. Texas Rangers were getting Colt Winchester 1873s from the start, I believe. Of course, Colt owed Texas Rangers a lot for the early success. Yeah, he did, but they owed him a lot of money that they never paid the company. I don't believe that the outstanding bill for the fluted cylinder 1860 Armies went off the books until 1878 or so. It was a account outstanding until then, when they finally erased it because the Confederate state of Texas didn't exist. Let's go on through here. He said, Greg Pilgrim said, I wish I had a place like Levin Bang Bang Range to shoot my assortment. Yeah. We got to stay hid out of the wind. That's why our place.
I'm going to take a quick bathroom break. I'll be right back.
Go ahead and I'll run through these comments and we'll cover a little more. All right, guys. He said, well, there was a Colt Lightning rifle. Yes, there was, and that was part of the backdoor deal that Winchester thought was being broke, so they decided to make their own revolver. And Steven Sheet says, Garrett, question, how many guns you've been firing while doing some target shooting? I used to shoot a lot more, especially cap and ball stuff. When I would go to work, I'd just take my toolbox, which had a bunch of caps and balls and powder and stuff, and I would just shoot cap and ball all day. That's how I got 3,000 rounds through that brass frame revolver back there. But caps are hard to find now, and so I don't do that. Most of the shooting you see is the stuff we film, because we're filming 2 or 3 guns a week, and we actually have about 15 videos ahead right now. So like I said, everything I shoot, we film pretty much here lately, especially with Ethan gone. Gray Pilgrim said, my great-granddad carried a new Army and Navy and 41 long Colt. He was a bridge foreman at the AT and SF and occasionally had labor relations issues. Yeah, I've heard about that. A guy told me not very long ago that his 1877 Thunderer was a military gun because the military used long Colt, and I'm not so sure. He might not have been thinking of another gun that was chambered in 41 long Colt. Tan says Custer was a rock star of his days. Companies sent him all kinds of stuff to promote, including firearms. Yes, that is true. Classic Guns Today says Uberti Schofield 45 tends to be very black powder sensitive, I think, because the gas ring or bushing is a little too thin from the longer cylinder. Yes, they do actually make it a little bit longer, and it's pretty sensitive. But Ethan, the other guy on this channel, he's not here right now, has shot a lot of original 44 Russian in an original 44 Russian Schofield, or original 44 Russian Model 3, whatever you call it. And actually, there's a video he's made before he left that's going to be coming out where he discusses, even on the originals, guys, the Smith & Wessons just foul out fast. And he's found a cure for that, but you'll have to wait for the video to come out.
Yeah, the cure is you throw it in the river and buy a Colt.
No, the cure involves grease and a certain screw tightness and all kinds of stuff like that you don't have to do it. I made that Pieta video the other day, and it started binding up. I could just see the comment section going off on that video. Somebody was going to say, you put grease on that. So I just spouted out right there. I'm a Colt shooter, and we don't use that stuff. Okay. And Classic Guns Today says some people over on one of the CAS forums was telling me that Colt tried to develop an open top 45 Colt, but it was so powerful that it would bend the frame, shooting so many times, hence the top strap. I've heard that too. Unfortunately, there is absolutely no record of a bent frame 45 Colt single or open top. I've heard that too, guys. That it's. You got to look back at the Walker. The Walker shot a pretty heavy load, and they never bent the frame. Granted, the frame was bigger.
Yeah.
But even the 1860 shot a 30 grain load, which isn't a whole lot less than the Colt, and they never bent a frame over there. Worst you'd do is hurt your wedge before you bent your frame. I've heard that too, and I like to give people.
But you're also,
about it.
In defense of that, you're also pushing a lot heavier bullet.
That's
so
true.
Be a lot more force. So I could see that, I could see that being a problem, but I would think if it was that big of a problem, they wouldn't make conversions that shoot 45 Colt today.
Yeah, I've got some really hot Colts through this 72 open top, hotter than I should have. They even say don't, but it's never been it. It might move the wedge a little bit, and that's the most that's going to happen. I've heard that before, and so I personally went on the search for that. And all I found was they're making the 72 open top and 44 Henry, and the government says that's not enough. And so they just put a top strap on it and call it the 73 and go up to 45 Colt. I haven't heard of a bent frame. I've heard of stretched frames, but not bent frames. Going back up. And that's about where we were on that. So you'll move into the 1900s when Colt kind of the single action is still really popular, especially around here, and probably where Duke's at too. All those old timers from the early 1900s, they still wanted their Colts, their single actions. It was carried for a long time.
In fact, yeah, it was pretty popular up until was it World War I? They stopped production. World War II, they stopped production. And the reason they come back is the Western movies got so popular that it started back up again. Yeah. And they were in production until 2007, 2000.
Yeah. And
whatever, yeah.
Post World War II is what we refer to as the second generation at this point.
Oh, I thought that was the third gen.
Well, the third gen comes out. The second gen, and as I believe is the 50s. The first gen, you have two different. You have pre-war you have the pre-war and the old models, the black powder frames, and you have the pre-war frame, which is the same thing really. but they really tool back up, and that's the second gen. Now we have third gens, which is,
Right.
like you said, early 2000s to now. Third gens have, especially the earlier ones in the early 2000s, had some extreme quality control issues on them.
Yeah, I guess I was just having a brain fart because I thought the explained was everything. It was smoke or black powder. Everything from the black powder was first gen. Second gen was everything from the smokeless up to World War II, and then post when they started back up again, that was third gen.
Well, I'm pretty sure we could break the,
Right.
and I may be wrong on this, guys, but I'm pretty sure we break the first gen into the pre-war and the old model guns. At least
Snapper
that's how
might
the
know.
replicas are done. Snapper, answer us that question.
Yeah, if anybody knows, it's gonna be Snapper.
Yeah, and Snapper's on here now. He says the plunger was mid to 1890s, later to the mid 1890s. Yes, in 96 was when we start officially seeing a change in the frame, and that's when they start calling it the smokeless frame, but they're not actually proofed for smokeless until about 1905, from what I can tell. That's why most people say if it's before 1900, just don't, even if it is the newer frame, don't shoot smokeless powder in it because it's not proof for it. And I think we've about covered it. We've come a long ways, but we didn't cover everything after 73, of course, but we come a long ways. Hey, we did this in an hour and a half. Took us 3.5 hours last time.
We had a lot to talk about then, but we covered a little bit shorter
Yeah.
time span this time.
And to be honest, guys, both of us are more well-versed, I believe, in the pre-1860 or 1860 and back than we are in this stuff. But
Yeah,
we have a decent working knowledge.
Right, because now we're getting into the part, start getting into the double actions where my knowledge is going to start getting pretty faint.
And get into this bad boy.
Yeah, there you go.
I think I'll take this up there and let Duke shoot it sometime.
That'd be fun.
I just went ahead and got this for a carry gun the other day, and I already had people telling me, that's not like the original. And I just have to go, yeah, I know. Got the original right here. But I'm not going to carry the original. It's too expensive. Don't knock my microphone over, get all wrapped up. But yeah, actually, I found that this grip frame is on the Uberti Thunder is quite a bit fatter and all around bigger than the original Thunder or Lightning grip. But man, I love this grip. Even with hot loads, it doesn't bother me one little bit. It carries really nice, doesn't rub you. And fat boys like me, that plow handle grip will rub your gut sometimes. But this don't rub you, and I really do enjoy that grip. It's pretty nice. Have you shot one? Go ahead.
I've not shot one like that, no.
I'll bring it up there to you sometime. You can shoot it. But
all right.
Full power load. Yeah. Not bad.
I can understand, the rubbing into your gut, because, that's why I'm trying to make a shoulder holster for my 1911.
Yeah, we need to talk about holsters.
I got a nice little scar on the side of my hip where the hammer rubbed me raw one day.
Guys, we've been talking about these guns. Let's not forget Duke Fraser Production holsters. This is for the Schofield. It's a good holster, and actually a lot of people have shown interest on this online. I don't know if anybody's ordered any yet, but
now the nice thing about the Schofield holster is a Schofield holster will accommodate the 7.5-inch single action Army, but the one made for the single action Army of that same style won't go for the Schofield. So if you want one for both, you got to order the Schofield one.
I've actually had some people asking about, is it possible for you to make a double or triple loop Mexican holster in a cross draw? Can you do that?
I could. I'd have to alter the pattern a little bit and play around with it. Right now, I actually haven't been doing a lot of leather work here lately for the past month, and my living situation is going to be changing here in the next week. So it's gonna the leather work's kind of on hold, if you will, for a little bit. I'm hoping to have the current batch that I've got orders for done by the 1st of April, if not by the end of April, which you guys got a couple coming in that batch. But for right now, go ahead and place your orders, but don't expect them real soon.
I'm going to do a video pretty quick, guys, on this one. I have been using this holster nonstop for a solid year. maybe 100 days out of that year, maybe I've carried it for 2/3 of that time. And sometimes I've carried a shorter Derringer, but I have carried this holster through the storm on fires and floods and everything else, horseback, and it doesn't even have the rivet in it, but it is flat holding up good. And
Yeah.
I bought it for my 1860, but I found out pretty soon it just became the home of my 72 open top. And I've carried this thing. It'll be a year next month, and I'll probably do a year video, but it literally has no more scratches on it than it did probably the first 2 weeks. I mean, there's a little wear right there. Mainly the most wear I'm getting is right here on the toe plug.
Yep.
But that's just to be expected. To be honest, at this point, I expect this thing to last 15, 20 more years.
Yeah, I'm surprised the stitching on that belt loop. That's usually the first thing to go. And that's one thing that aggravated me on buying the cheaper holsters, like those cheap Cabela ones. You wear them for 2 weeks and the stitching was gone. So I'm surprised. I'm glad the saddle stitch that I did on that is still just as tight as it was when I made it.
Yeah, and I've been in dirt on this with this thing. I've been off of the four-wheeler, off of the horse. And it's bounced around, and like I said, in tractors, and I've had it hung in barbed wire fences and carried to church every week too. But that stitching has held up really well. The only thing I could say is over time, where this used to stand up taller, the only thing I can say about it, and it's just going to happen. This used to stand up taller and be straighter. Over time, it has kind of worked its way out so it wears like this. So it points out a little more, but that's okay. My gut points out a little more than it did last year.
And, that's going to be expected with that fold-over style. And that's why I offer the two styles. You got the fold-over, you've got the flat. But even with the flat, I noticed with mine that I carry when I'm doing my living history portrayal is, it'll kind of flop over out there even with that flat style. So,
yeah. And I'm probably not going to wear that as much this year just because I have this new shorter barrel gun, and like I said, I got it just because that grip is really excellent for horseback riding. I didn't get this gun for historical accuracy. I got it as a using piece, and so it's everything. I got the shorter barrel, so it's easier to carry anywhere, and that grip is really good for carrying. And I'm not so sure at this point that I may have found a reference, and I can't guarantee it's true yet because it's in a book by a guy I don't trust. But I found a reference to possibly Colt attempting to put that on a single action Army and then deciding why would we do that when that might dampen the shells of the 77 and so of the double action.
Right.
So they wanted to keep everything separate. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it would make sense to me that it was thought of because that is a really decent carry grip. And I think that's all the holsters I brought today. I didn't bring a whole lot of others. I had those two.
I know I have seen a set of Colts that do have bird head grips on them. 73 single actions.
Yeah.
Actual Colts. But I think they were made in about 1980 because I was in a guy's Colt collection, and yeah, they all had pearl handles, and they were a set of four. It had the 3, the 4 3/4, the 5 1/2, and the 7.5 inch barrel.
Well, if Colt didn't do it, it was going to have to be custom made just for the fact of these aren't the same frame. If I hold them up here and look at it, this is the original. And this is you can see that frame is almost half again as wide. And so you could
Uberti's basically copying the 73 single action frame.
Yeah.
What they're doing.
This is a 100% 73 single action except the grip. And that's just so I'm not saying it couldn't have been done in history, but it would have had to have been if somebody did it, they would have had to manufacture the grip for it somewhere because it wouldn't have just fit as an interchangeable part.
It's too bad Uberti doesn't make an actual copy of that double action because
they don't.
There's enough of them out there they could make it.
They don't do an actual double action, but they do a Lightning, which is built on a 22 frame, and they make it into a 38. Right. So it's actually more weight and feel is correct, but it would be difficult to produce this double action because if you look at it, there's no cylinder stop notches in that thing. It's because the cylinder stop notch comes in from the back. And so it would require an entire, you can see, I don't know if you can see it there, but there's a cylinder stop notches right there on the back of the cylinder. So it would require completely different machinery. But this is, in 38 Colt, this would have been one of the handiest little, I mean, this is just the most balanced, beautiful. I know why they sold so many. And they're not as fragile as a lot of people make them out to be. The trigger return spring on this one was broken when we got it. Fix that. You know, it's good as the day it came home. Caleb didn't see me dry firing that, I hope.
If not, we'll hear about it.
We probably will. Let's go over here to comments one more time before we leave out. Yeah, in a big hurry, are you? We can go to 145. We're at 139. 1874 Sharps. Hey, 1874 Sharps. A Wild Snapper said, I'm looking forward to getting one of Duke's high-quality holsters. Yeah, I know which one he's getting, too.
Yeah, it's going to be – I'm probably going to have to order some leather before I can actually finish this batch out. But start looking towards the end of April. Hopefully I'll have them done. If not, I definitely will have them done by the 1st of June.
If you want to see a review on that holster that you're looking at, Snapper, go over and check out Plowboy. He has one Duke Fraser Bohannon holster.
And Dustin does as well.
Yeah, and evidently iPod Walker did something funny up here. I haven't got classic guns today. Garrett, you open carry cross draw in church? ? Yes, I do. And it depends. A lot of times they'll be 1911s. It can be anything. My brothers do too. We have kind of a security team. The pastor does too. And we set up strategically in different places. But I do open carry cross draw because I kind of hope that if somebody comes in, they will see the situation they're walking into and we won't have to get in. What did John Wayne say? We might be saving some poor soul's life with this audacious display.
Yeah. Some poor miscreant soul's life. Yeah.
I had an idea, and I don't want to run it by you guys. With the copyright claims that are on YouTube and things, I couldn't pull this off on a regular video, but I would love to get a couple of guys together, Duke included, and let's watch. We won't put it on YouTube, but we will run it as a one-time live stream, whatever you guys think. If you can do this, Duke, I'd like to get Snapper and Duke. I would love to watch the Searchers and do a live reaction, and everybody on the chat can watch it on their home with us, and we could all live reaction to what's going on at the same time. What do you guys think about that? We couldn't leave it on YouTube because of copyright claims, but we could do a one-time run of it.
Right.
1874 Sharp says, I got one of Duke's holsters and I put it on my 1851 Navy. Yes, you do. As a matter of fact, that was the last one that you sold, I think, Duke.
Yeah, good. Very well been.
That 1874 Sharps is my nephew.
Okay. Okay, yeah.
On you, Sharps. And he does. He wears a black leather vest and that 51 Navy, and with that black cross draw, that is a slick looking rig.
To be honest with you, I've sold so many, it's like I can't keep track. But I was watching on one of the Facebook groups. I think it was a Uberti Facebook group, or it was the Old West Guns or something. One of them on there, and I was sitting there looking, and all of a sudden, this guy posted a picture of his Schofield with a holster. I'm like, hey, I recognize that holster. I made that holster.
There you go. You're starting to get out there. Gar's blog says he likes the civilian flap holster. I don't know if you've ever sold him one, but Duke does have the civilian half flap, if that's what you're talking about.
What was the name again?
GXRZA Vlogs. I know he's always here, but I always pronounce it
wrong.
wrong.
Yeah. I think he just emailed me. If it's the same person, I think he's emailed me this morning about ordering one.
Yeah. Okay, Snapper says the first generation is 1873 to 1945. Second generation starts in 1950s. And what we call the third generation is now just what you get from their custom shop, I think.
Okay.
But we talk about third gens. They're a little different because at one point they were made out of Uberti parts. We won't say that. I don't think they still are, but they were at one point.
Yeah, it was something that Uberti was able to get the rights to reproduce the Colt, because Colt was producing arms from the military at the time. So Uberti got rights to produce a Colt under the understanding that they would also produce the parts for Colt to put together in the U.S. So Uberti parts put together in the U.S., the Colt factory, and that's why Ubertis were so close to the original Colts. But then they changed things around after that and started going with the which I didn't mind this. Both of mine have it. It's that pin with the coil spring for the hand.
Yeah.
That's actually pretty nice because the hand spring won't ever break on you.
And it makes the action pretty smooth because that
it makes
other one
very
don't have to ride up and down with the hand.
Yeah. And of course now, I mean, they've got all this retractable. Did that new one you buy have the retractable firing pin?
No, that was why I kind of wanted one. I didn't necessarily mind it, but like I said, this was something I've been looking for a while, and I walked into the gun store, and this one was sitting there calling my name, and I did want the crossbolt, so I was going to go with the Pieta, so I would have a 4-click hammer, but this one has the screw and the 4-click hammer because it's the old model. You can still get 4-click hammers if you go with the old frame from Uberti. Cimarron, yeah. And that's pretty well all we got going on for right now. We still have 17 people in here. If you guys got any last minute questions, go ahead and shout them out. Duke, we got any plans for videos coming out on your end, or are you pretty well caught up until you make some more?
Yeah, I'm caught up till I make some more. That 87 video, I've been sitting on that for a long time. I went back and reviewed the Patterson video, and by the time I edit out and cover up all the cuss words that I'm using in that video, it's just going to be me speaking in Morse code through the entire thing. So that video is just not going to happen.
Yeah, well, hopefully if everything works out, there will be some more collaboration videos coming up in a couple months.
Yeah. And right now the weather's kind of sucky for going out and shooting. And being as I work night shift, it's not like I can really go out and shoot anytime I want.
Yeah.
But hopefully I'm going to try to it's me and a friend. She's got a sight in her rifle. We was talking about going out to another friend's and sight in. I was thinking about taking my 1911 out, maybe doing a video with it. I really don't have too much exciting to do videos on, to be honest, except my modern guns. But
I'm still waiting for that Shockwave video.
Yeah, the thing about the Shockwave and like my AR pistols, like I just don't want to do videos on them because I just don't want evidence out there that I got them.
The way that things are going these days, you never know when that's going to change. The rules are going to change. American wants a Mexican 3-loop cross draw. Can you do it, dude? I mean,
I could probably make that work. I'll have to, and like I said, it's probably gonna be. Might have to put that into the next batch because I'm gonna have to drop a new pattern for it. But yeah, I've had people inquire into them. I just not had enough inquiries to sit down and actually do it. But yeah, I can probably pull that off. It's not gonna be that hard. Like I said, I just got to alter the pattern a little bit.
Yep, Duke, I want a 3-loop Mexican cross draw for this.
Well, I don't know what you're going to do with the extra 2 loops, but
that's what come on, you just make them real small.
The smaller those loops get, the less tension they hold on them holsters.
Yeah,
and it's like that one that I sold you, that closed toe one. I designed that thing and I kind of liked it. And it's a copy of a historical design.
This one?
No, the flap one, that 2 flap.
Oh, I don't have it here.
Yeah. You're the only one that's ever bought one from me, so I'm just not going to make them. And that thing, I don't know what it is about that. Well, I know what it is, but there's pictures of the originals. But when you go to draw a gun out of those, they do not stay in the skirt like they should. They slip. The holster slips the skirt just about every time.
Yeah.
But I redesigned because the only 2-loop I've got like that really sells well is the god dang it, the Bohannon one. And I redesigned that for longer barrel guns, so it actually encloses the whole thing. Mm-hmm. I just haven't advertised them too much, just because I just ain't had the time or the leather to spare to make a few to advertise. But
Has anybody
Yeah,
ever asked you to make one for those long barrel Pietas?
like the really long barreled ones.
Yeah, like I just did a video on the other day.
No, I've never had
Well, if
anybody
they
ask
ever
them.
do, just take that McRae holster and add 4
Right.
inches to it, and it would be just perfect.
Most of the ones I get orders for, it's the Slim Jims.
Mhm.
Once in a while, I get an order for a double loop for like one of the 73 single actions. But yeah, it's either for a Remington, for a Navy, for an Army, and it's usually Slim Jims. I don't get a lot, and when I do get for double loops, it's usually the Bohannon one.
iPod Walker has a question here. Garrett, do you know of anyone who is reproducing flintlock revolvers? No, I do not.
Flintlock revolvers didn't catch on back in the day. That's probably why there's not reproductions of them now.
I don't know. I do know some, like we just got a Queen Anne's the other day where it's a threaded barrel that comes off and you load it in the back of it. But we had to buy an original because replicas don't make the threaded barrels. They just make you load it from the end. So that kind of defeats the whole point of the Queen Anne pistol. But
the muzzle loader shop currently has, I think, I've seen somebody posted on Facebook, a Ferguson pistol.
That'd be interesting. Is that shop out of Oklahoma?
Yeah, I think so.
That you can build a Baker rifle from just parts that they make. It's
right.
I wouldn't be surprised if there was one place that you could probably find the parts to do that iPod. It would probably be the muzzleloader shop down there in Oklahoma.
And contact them; they could probably make one for you if you wanted it bad enough. And I know that they make Ferguson rifles, but I looked at the kit, and they're all kits. You got to do the finish work on most of them.
Mm-hmm.
That Ferguson rifle kit was $2,000.
Oh yeah, it's getting to where you could probably buy an original for the price of what you're making. I don't know. I have to go through, but I'm pretty sure there's actually a set of blueprints for that in Haven and Belden. At least might be patents. Do they have patents in that point? Of the Collier. I've heard it pronounced so many different ways. Yeah.
I honestly don't know.
It's not a blueprint, but if you guys are wondering, that's what he's talking about, right? Yep, right there. That is a Collier revolving flintlock pistol. And if you think you have problems with cap lock pistols, I can imagine the issues you would have if you tried to run one of those things.
Whatever you do, don't make the one with a turret that goes this way.
Yeah, the turret. Yeah, actually, there is a book called. It's a Louis L'Amour book. It's called. I can't remember if it's Barnabas or Jubal Sackett. I think it's the one called Jubal Sackett, where he comes like before all the other him and Barnabas, one of the two. There's Barnabas and his sons were Yancey and Jubal, and they're like on the Appalachian Trail in like 1620. I mean, like really early.
Oh.
And they have some of the earliest flintlocks in that book, and they actually have a Collier, and he talks about it. And I don't know if any of those were actually made that early, because that's pretty early. But
right.
It is a really good story. I just remember that because it blew my mind as a kid when they're like flintlock revolver. I was like, how does that even work?
Isn't that the book, the Blue Ridge Mountains or something, or the?
Yeah, it's called Trail, or I know Jubal was the one that had it. It's called Over the Far Blue Mountains, maybe.
Yeah.
I think
it's an early Sackett one.
And those early Sackett ones.
What's funny about Louis L'Amour is I read Louis L'Amour a lot in high school. I think I read just about all the books he wrote, all the Westerns anyway, and read them multiple times, in fact. But when I got to college, and I started trying to read them again for fun, I suddenly started to realize that, they're all the same book, just a different name, different place. But one thing that's definitely common in them is they all got a Sackett in it.
Yep, somewhere, somehow. One of my favorites was A Man Called Noon. That was the first one I ever, and then I found out there was a movie, and that was the very first time I went to watch a movie, and I was like, this is going to be great. And then I was like, one of my very first experiences of me realizing these people can butcher a book and not make a good movie out of it.
And then what was the one that they made a movie that had Yul Brynner in it?
Oh, Catlow.
Yeah, Catlow. I like that one. I like Tucker.
The movie or the book?
The book.
Yeah.
I like the books a lot better. There's Tucker. I like that. I liked them all, but after a while, it's like, oh, they're just the same thing. Once in a while, some of them are totally different from others, but pretty much there's some that are all Crossfire Trail and Utah Blaine. Those are pretty much the same book.
Yep. Some of them he branched out though on a lot, where you have the one where it's the Indian guy who crashes in Russia in the Cold War and walks back across the Bering Strait. That one's pretty good.
Right. Yeah.
And
yeah.
The Lonesome Gods, where they go through a portal into a different dimension and actually wind up fighting like giant Gila monsters. That was pretty good. That was a little weird, but it's pretty good.
Is that the one where it's down in Arizona in Monument Valley or something like that?
Yeah, I started Mesa. That. On top of Mesa and falls through the portal. That was
the main character's like a cop or something. Yeah.
And he winds up in a different version of 1880 where there's dinosaurs and castles, but it's pretty cool. It's way out there for a little more, but it's pretty good.
I started reading that one, and I remember the only thing I remember that is he talks about the guy up at the Mesa and seeing these weird lights, and that's all I stopped reading it after that. But
yeah. You got to go with The Quick and the Dead. That one is really good.
That one is good. Yep. Let's see. Utah Blaine's a good one. Quick and the Dead.
Did you ever read To Tame a Land?
Yeah.
Oh, that one's great. That's one of my favorites. He talks about reading Plutarch, and I used to read that to Ethan when he was real little. And he had a horse named Blue, and he rode around with this book, Plutarch, and it was a big book. And Ethan determined that Plutarch had to be so big that Blue had to be an elephant to carry it. He was about 5 or 6. So he has this picture. He still has this picture of old Rye riding across the West on an elephant with his giant book behind. And one of the best things in that movie was he's undercover in Jackson's Hole at the end. And one of the guys knows his name, but he's going under a different name. And his name is Ryan, and everybody calls him Rye. And he shoots the guy, and the guy's last word is Rye. The guy says Rye, and one of the old boys says, "Well, get him a drink."
Yeah, it's been a long time since I read that one, but yeah, I remember that one real good. Yeah.
The Walking Drum. Yeah, The Walking Drum. That's the one. I found that book when I was in college in a little bookstore, kind of a hole-in-the-wall bookstore, big old. The Walking Drum is the one where he goes. It's set in medieval times, and he goes clear across Europe, and he fights the Huns. That is a really good one. The Walking Drum. I forgot about that one.
That one I haven't read. And then there's that one about the two little kids that are stuck in a blizzard. My grandmother read that one. Maybe that might be a different author I'm thinking of, but I thought it was Louis L'Amour.
It might be. I don't think I've read all of them. I've read a lot of them.
And then there's another one. Oh, God.
The Last of the Breed was the native that crashed in Siberia during the Cold War. Yeah, that's a good one, too. Max Brand. Max Brand got some good books. Are you thinking Max Brand? That's what A American says.
Maybe that might be. Yeah, there's another one there that I read where it takes place in New Mexico, and the guys in the cabin, they try to run him out, and they rescue some girl that makes donuts for him. And yeah, I can't remember.
I kind of remember that. Yeah, it might be. It might be a Zane Grey too.
No, it's definitely Louis L'Amour. The title starts with an R. I remember. But
I just
Then,
go ahead.
Then there's the one about the kid that goes up and his dad gets killed and had to set a colt with ivory handles with cardinal in them or something. I can't remember. Yeah, and that one takes place up at Silverton, Colorado.
Yeah. I was just thinking about that. I haven't thought of The Last of the Breed for a long time since I was in college. But probably last time I read that book, The Last of the Breed, I just remembered that Russian bad dude had a white spot in his hair. And that's it. He was chasing this Indian clear across Siberia. In the last page of the book, the main Russian general gets a box, and it's a scalp with a white piece of patch in the hair. That was good. The Black Rifle 1760 book. Yeah. Actually, Louis L'Amour has a book called The Ferguson Rifle. It's pretty good, too.
Yep. Yeah, I've read that one, yeah.
And The First Fast Draw, I'm just going through them now. Jubal Sackett, those are all really good books.
Yeah, then there's one that takes place cattle drive right after the Civil War. Okay, God, it starts with a K. Yeah, I can't think
Not
of that either.
Conacher, is it?
No, Conacher's a C. That's a really good one.
Okay.
Starts with a K. It's
Is it the other family? Because there's two families. There's the Sackett.
no, this one wasn't a family one. This one it was just on oh God. The thing is, some of those books are named after the character they're about, and it's like I can't remember names worth of crap, but there's a ton of them.
I will admit, last time I tried to read one.
Kilgore.
You might be
Kilkenny.
right. Kilkenny. Yep,
Yep.
there he is, right there in the chat. L Candle came up with it right there in the chat. Kilkenny, yeah. There's another one about an Irishman that I like is the Iron Marshal, where he
that's a good one. I like that
most
one.
of the time in New York City and then goes west. That's actually a pretty good one too. Man, I haven't thought about these. Well, I will admit, last time I tried to sit down and read one, I thought this isn't the kind of writing that I'm used to reading nowadays. It's a little hard to get back into.
I'm gonna have to go so I can get my supper here pretty soon.
Yep. I gotta turn my hat up like Duke. Well, guys, we are sitting right at 2 hours here in 30 seconds. So I want.
So you got Colt history and a Louis L'Amour review section.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened, but you get me and Duke talking, these things happen. But anyway, guys, I appreciate everybody coming out. Stay tuned on, I believe, March the 5th. I'm going to be on here with War Horses with Trooper Cody. We're going to be talking Anzac history and World War I and Light Horse, I believe, unless I'm wrong. That is the plan at the moment. Anyway, trust in God. Keep your powder dry. Bye.